Africa is on fire, or at least at the time of recording this video, not quite yet, but getting close to it. And I'm going to explain to you why that is important. This is the Urban Sentinel, and let's get into it. Plain and simple, you've been watching the headlines amongst many other things going on in the world, and there is a brewing conflict in the country of Niger and Nigeria and the surrounding Burkina Faso lands and that entire western section of the African continent. The primary thing with this video and with pretty much any other video you're going to be watching is the thing that is going to be overlooked, and I'm going to try to highlight it as best I can. This is not about the humanitarian crisis and the suffering of the people. This is not about the evils of capitalism and consumerism. This is purely about resource wars, because that's what we're looking at on the whole as it is. There is not a single global conflict area that does not involve at least one or more parties specifically fighting to take or to hang on to a type of resource within their land or within a region. Many areas, you have the fighting between India and Pakistan through the Kashmir. You have the current ongoing battles brewing in Ukraine and Russia. Yes, on the Russian aspect, they can say it's about the Russian sovereignty and protecting their borders, but it also comes down to that the country of Ukraine, the geophysical land that it sits on, holds a large portion of international trade and resources that the world depends upon. You control that, you can control the actions of the world. No different than what's going on in the countries in Africa, because many of those countries, you never hear about them until something like this occurs, because those countries are rich in the raw minerals and materials that are used throughout the world for many things. Most of the components of the nickel, the cobalt, and other rare minerals that are mined throughout Africa are then shipped off to processing plants and other places around the world. Countries like Taiwan take those materials and they make the microchips that then go into everything that we utilize, even devices that are made by China and then sold on the open market to the rest of the world. We will see conflict. There's no getting around that. I am not in any way, shape, or form promoting a beautiful sunrise and the world wakes up in a peaceful nirvana. We're going to be seeing conflict, and it won't necessarily be strictly this country versus that country for the stated reasons that the media puts out. It's always going to be the underlying reason of resources, and how that affects you is all of those resources are part of a trickle-down situation. Right now, you're watching this on your cell phone, on your laptop, your tablet, what have you, that all those components that are in that device were manufactured and mined in other countries. The food that you had for breakfast, what you're eating for lunch, what you plan on having for dinner. Again, each individual nation does have its own supply, and each individual nation does have the capability of supplying a good portion of what they use domestically for themselves. But because of globalization, there are very, very few countries that strictly adhere to effectively homegrown only. There's very little food in trade that doesn't get exported from someplace else and then imported to another location. There are very few places where you can go where everything is made and manufactured 100% from start to finish in the actual country. You may have materials mined in one country and then sent to a different country for processing, and then sent to another country for assembling, and then finally sent out to another country for actual distribution. You may have one country that says, hey, we will handle the processing for you. In exchange, make a deal with this other country to get them to lower the cost of this imported item for us. That's the way the world goes. That's the trade flow that's happening. And when you have military conflicts, when you have conflicts between governments, between regional areas within the same government, you tend to throw a wrench in the works of that normal process. And what we're going to be looking at above anything else are the stub your toe, stumble and fall situations with the supply chain and the distribution system. We remember those experiences not that long ago where you had cargo ships getting stuck in the Suez Canal, where you had the shutdowns and lockdowns due to the pandemic, pretty much closing down either factories, processing plants, in warehouses, slowing up the process. You had reduced workforces, so even when products did come to the ships and dock, you didn't have enough workers to be able to effectively and quickly unload and get all those products out to the stores. And then even on the retail end, when they finally got to the stores, you had very few people there that were able to quickly get everything up and put on the shelves, even though the lines would be around the building for people waiting to come in. We're going to see more of that, and it won't be any one specific thing. It'll be small things that are connected to each other, little ripple effects that go out when this particular supplier of this type of item is no longer able to do it because the country's in a civil war, and then this other country, which could also provide, is being blockaded by some other nation that won't allow their shipping to pass through their waters, and it will continue on and on. But the primary focus with Africa being is its central location, the large number of resources that are used as base products, the foundation for many of the things that we use, in the same way that crude oil is effectively used in a wide array of petroleum products, that if you cut off the supply of crude oil coming out of the Middle East, you then trickle down and reduce the availability for that petroleum byproduct to be used in everything else from, the nylons and plastics and synthetics that we're all used to. It takes a little while. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It could be weeks to months, but the problem is wholesalers, distributors, manufacturers, retailers, once they know that their supply is going to be affected and they can't pivot to another supplier because that is also connected to the same source, they're going to start incrementally raising up their prices, reducing what they put out for purchase so they have a little bit kept back in reserve. It's sort of like what you do with your preps. You buy 2 extra cans of this, 2 extra bags of this, and you put them back for storage later on. Naturally, when you run through it, you know that, I've got 2 more bags of rice back here. I'll use this next one, but I got to remember to go get 2 more the next time I go to the grocery store. They do the same thing, but on a much larger scale, on the scale of tonnage versus a bag here or a can here. But if that supply is not coming in and it's not coming in at a regular rate or at a rate that they can afford, they're going to have to compensate by reducing what they do put out, raising the cost up so they can offset it. And yes, you can look at it as, they're just trying to line their pockets, maybe so. But it plain and simple comes down to, if they don't buy it, then someone else will. And if offering more money to one supplier or one distributor or one wholesaler or one shipper ensures that they get the products first, or they get the most of the products, that means that you still have the opportunity to get those products yourself when you need to buy them, because that's what the end result is. You have to think about what it takes and all the steps to go on to get those supplies to you. So in the case of a civil war, in the case of a revolutionary war, open border conflict, whatever it may be that starts in Africa, is going to have effects all around the world. In much the same way that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine started, we saw ripple effects with that, but it was isolated to just that area. You get another conflict going up in the continent of Africa, maybe you have a conflict popping up and flaring up in South America, Central America. We still have the looming threat of China and Taiwan in the Pacific region, and that's going to affect a larger area just as well, with shipping and transport, communications, electronics, everything. Those individual areas that each on their own by itself is cause for concern, but can still be navigated around. But once you start looking at the global map and you start seeing hotspot, 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 hotspot all over the place, the areas that you can pass through, those clear channels that you can get products and goods and services through, both physically and financially, become a lot narrower, and there becomes a greater level of overlap to the point where things get cut off. So it's a case of being prudent now while it's still available. Start looking at your critical resources, the things that you need the most. Even when you know that there are, tons of plenty on the shelf at your big box store or whatever it is, start thinking about where all that comes from, how it gets there, because even if the label says made in the USA, made in Canada, made in whatever country that you're in or right next to, doesn't necessarily mean that the entirety of it is going to be point of origin at that place or readily available, even if it is, because again, if the United States, as an example, were to be completely isolated and left on its own to support itself, it is possible, but there will be severe restrictions and reductions in everything that we do, everything that we use, everything that we consume, far beyond the rationing that was done during World War II. Because one, we have far more people right now in the US than we did at the peak point of World War II. And then two, we are all, no matter how frugal you think you are, You are living at a higher level of luxury and comfort right now than anyone was back in 1945. Plain and simple. No matter how much you say that you cut back and you minimize and you only do what's necessary and only consume exactly what you're going to use, you're still living at a higher level than anyone was back in the 40s. So if something like that were to occur and we all tighten our belts as it is, everyone's going to be walking around with a size 0 and they're going to be miserable. And when people become miserable, not just simply from lack of food, but also from lack of freedom, then that's when you start to have more problems pop up. And unfortunately, as it seems to be in a lot of countries, looking at France right now, looking at some of the other countries in Europe, in South America and Central America, when the government realizes the people are upset with it or the people have a lack of faith in the government, instead of working to mediate and navigate through the problem together, they work on the use a heavy hand and a closed fist to solve the problem. But this is just what I'm thinking, my own personal speculation. Anyway, like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.